John 7:16. Respondit eis Iesus, et dixit, Mea doctrina non est mea, sed eius qui misit me. Jesus answered or responded to them and said, My teaching is not mine, but it is of him who sent me. Here, Jesus is replying to the astonishment of the Jewish leaders, who had been full of amazement that Jesus could speak so insightfully about the scriptures at the festival, though as far as they knew, he had not studied with anyone. He had not learned formally through a process of typical education the sorts of things that he was saying, as far as they knew. So here he answers their amazement. And this is something of a pleonastic formula. It is a little bit redundant. He responded to them and said, now, of course, we don't really need and said there, but as so often, our Latin translator here is following the Greek scrupulously. And we get a quotation here, a direct quotation. Jesus says, Mea doctrina, my teaching, my instruction, is not mine. And it's a good idea for us just to hover for a moment on these possessive pronouns. And we want to distinguish them from the personal pronouns. And we might ask, for instance, why don't we get mei in each of these cases? Why don't we get the doctrina mei is not mei? The doctrina, the teaching of me, is not of me. Why don't we use those personal pronouns just as we do with eius a little bit later on? The teaching is not mine, but it is of him who sent me. And this is a third person pronoun, eius, from is, ea, id. What we need to know and remember is that Latin almost always prefers to use the possessive pronoun in cases like this in preference to the personal pronoun in the genitive. And the reason is that Latin likes to reserve that genitive of the personal pronoun generally for cases where an objective genitive is in play. We've talked about objective genitives when we've discussed previous verses, so I won't review what exactly an objective genitive is now. You can refer to your grammar of choice if you need a refresher on that. But in general, Latin prefers the possessive pronoun in cases where we might expect a genitive of the personal pronoun. So mea doctrina rather than doctrina mei or mei doctrina. But when it comes to the third person personal pronoun here, there's no problem. Typical Latin usage. Notice the sense would be very different if we used suus, which is the third person possessive pronoun, because that always has a reflexive sense. It refers back to the subject. So we definitely don't want that here. So Jesus answered them, dative case of people replied to, of course, and he said, My teaching is not mine, but it is of him who sent me. And then we get a nice little relative clause here with a third person singular perfect active indicative from mitto, mittere, misi, missum.